Bang, bang. And we're back with another Supreme Court ruling, this time on the Second Amendment, hence the bang, bang that we're doing right now. So we've got some breaking news out of the Supreme Court. Was it 5-4? Was it 6-3? Was it 7-2? Was it 8-1? Or was it 9-0 on a case of domestic violence and gun owners? Only Jason knows. So was it, Jason, 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, or 9-0?
Well, Miss Phoebe, the Supreme Court upheld a federal gun control law that is intended to protect victims of domestic violence. In their first Second Amendment case since 2022, the justices ruled 8-1 in favor of a 1994 ban on firearms for people under restraining orders. The court reversed a ruling from the New Orleans Federal Appeals Court that had struck down the law. The purpose of this order is to maintain protection for spouses, former spouses, and or family members who are targeted by these individuals. This story is from AP News by Mark Sherman on June 21st, 2024.
So here we are, 8-1. That was our magical number here. So who is that one, you may be asking, dear viewer? That number one is one Clarence Thomas, who seems to be the outlier when it comes to, gun control, this, that, and the other. So, Infidel, are you surprised that it's Clarence Thomas on the outside of this again?
I think that it would have been a surprise if Clarence Thomas wasn't the outlier. I think that that's more likely his official role is to be the batshit crazy Supreme Court justice, so that the other justices who most of them aren't sane, rational people, or at least rule like they aren't, that they have an opportunity to look sane just standing next to him. It's rather consistent that he takes this contrarian position on almost every position that you could possibly imagine. If Clarence Thomas supports something, that pretty much makes me think I probably should be on the other side. Now, in this particular issue, I'm not so cut and dry on where I stand on it, but as I said, just the mere fact that Clarence Thomas is against it is a motivation for me to think, well, maybe there's something to this.
So the substance of this case is that a man who had a domestic violence restraining order against him, who had threatened his girlfriend with a firearm, had his firearms taken away by the federal law at issue here. And the justice ruled that federal law and the Second Amendment allow, quite rightly, that the regulation of the militia includes the regulation of people with domestic violence tendencies as seen in a domestic violence order, as the facts of this case have said. Now, what is domestic violence and domestic abuse here? That's quite a broad statement. What is a firearm? That's quite a broad statement as well, because we've also had the bump stock case that says, no, they're not an automatic weapon, even though they fire at the same rate as an automatic weapon, which is a bit of a mind bend, in my opinion. But, Jason, what's your opinion on what is a firearm?
I mean, a firearm it's just a gun in general. It's a thing you put a little bullet inside, whatever chamber and however way you do it. You go toot, right inside of there, and then you go beep, and it shoots out really fast, right? That's a firearm. You hold it with your arm and it fires. I mean, the idea that if it's not automatic, if it's this, that, or the other, I think that's just silliness. But it's fire. As a Texan and as a gun owner, everything that I own that goes doo doo, that's a firearm. Whether it's small, medium, or nice and big and long, either way, if something shoots out of it and you squeeze a trigger and it's a projectile, that's most likely a firearm.
So where do you stand on this then, as a gun-toting Texan, as you just called yourself?
I mean, I'm probably
big sigh. That's a big sigh.
Well, I mean, it's hard. Here's the thing. Where do I stand with this? Well, okay, so here's the problem I have. So when you look into restraining orders, it changes jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but generally you can get a restraining order on somebody who is alleged, right? And I got a little information on it. So the standard of proof required to obtain a restraining order can, like I said, vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but is generally lower than the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt required in criminal trials. Judges actually have incentives to err on the side of granting restraining orders, because if a judge grants a restraining order against someone who might not warrant it, typically the only repercussion is that the defendant might appeal the order. The problem is there's also social repercussions for restraining orders and all that. But that said, if the judge denies a restraining order and the plaintiff is killed or injured, poor publicity and an enraged community, a lot of times, enraged community reaction may harm the jurist's career. Some attorneys have actually criticized the use of restraining orders on the theory that parties to a divorce may file such orders to gain tactical advantages rather than out of like a legitimate fear of harm. So
here's a question for you. Are you opposed to restraining orders that are used in a civil context, or do you think they should only be imposed as a result of criminal conduct?
I think a restraining order should, I say should, that's a strong word. If you're going to put that many limits on somebody, especially in a place like Texas, which protects your gun rights, and where we have castle doctrine, where it extends to my car, where it extends to my place of business, and you're going to remove that from me on the basis of an alleged offense, to me, I that just doesn't sit right with me. And I hate to be at all in any agreement with Clarence fucking Thomas, but at the same time, it just doesn't seem right to me. And I'm pro upping gun restrictions. I'm pro all that stuff, but I've experienced having to put a restraining order on somebody. That said, I wasn't worried about them shooting me or killing me. They just needed to stay the fuck away. That's really it.
Here's a question. Are you saying that it's more of an issue with how restraining orders themselves operate here? Because are you in favor of, or are you opposed to the principle of this case where someone who has potential domestic abuse scenarios with the use of a firearm being restricted from having a firearm?
I think it's a slippery slope, because whenever we look at like forensic psychology and shit like that, we look at like potential for violence and potential for this. And a lot of times we see strong biases that affect people's decisions and affect jurors' decisions and judges' decisions. So we have to be really careful judging somebody to say, well, you could potentially do this. You know, in many cases, people who harm other people, you know, there's a lot of times it's kind of out of the blue, you know, so not out of the blue, but it's, you have, oh, he was such a nice person. He was so calm. He was a law abiding citizen and he just snapped, or this, that, or the other, or they have no priors. They have no prior violence. We see this in school shooter cases across the board. No prior violence. They're isolated from people. They keep to themselves, and then they go take out a school full of kids.
Yeah, but we don't let people have driving licenses until they can prove they're not going to be as safe because of the potential harm they could cause.
Yes and no. That's the thing. We give people driver's licenses before they've even had time to really drive on the road. So until you have experience.
That's clearly an English versus American thing here, because the British driving test is very thorough. Yeah, I just want to bring Infidel in here. So you are a gun-toting Texan yourself, are you?
I'm not a Texan. Let me take exception of that. I live in Texas.
Yeah, you do.
But I'm from Louisiana.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
Are you toting gun person?
That would be more accurate, yes.
So
now, good. No, one thing I did want to say is that it is going to be a slippery slope almost any way we look at this, because the Second Amendment is quite open, and well, at least it's been interpreted in the last 30, 40, 50 years to be far more expansive than it originally was. If we look back, 100, 150 years ago, gun restrictions on local levels was far more commonplace and pretty much accepted as a common practice. But where we are now, that's not the case. So having said that, I do think that the ends justifies the means is a dangerous way to go about things. Mm-hmm. But it is kind of hard to argue with the fact that when we do look at homicides that are from domestic violence, over half of them are related to guns. Guns are involved in that crime. And of course, it's a little difficult to argue that disarming those abusers doesn't decrease that homicide rate. So there is definitely a positive aspect to this. But I do think that Jason does point to a valid problem, and that is the consideration of when we implement some type of restraining order, because that level of oversight is far more important. Because if it's just, you fill out a piece of paper, you get it, and as you mentioned though, Phoebe, it's not temporary restraining orders, so it has some oversight more than just somebody requesting one. But we also know, as Jason said, is that there's a tendency, especially a gender bias tendency, that if a woman in a divorce files for a restraining order against a man, there is a very strong tendency to accept that she's probably telling the truth. And that may be the case, that may be not. And that's when it comes down to the judgment of making a decision that the judges need to do. And that's where we have this, because also, again, as Jason said, judges have a tendency to go, let's do this, because if I don't and something bad happens, my career's in the toilet. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem.
I think this is where me as a Brit has the disconnect here. I just don't understand the American obsession with the firearm. I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I don't think I ever will. I may live in the Midwest. I may live in a state that has gun regulation, that has firearm can be taken away from domestic abuse convicts, that you have to have safety gun, you have to have safety device on your guns if there's children in the home. You have to have a concealed carry license for a handgun. I still, as a Brit, my brain kind of explodes. I mean, I've got friends in Australia who after the Port Arthur massacre go, how can America do it? And I think that the other thing to look at here is gun control has to have something. It has to have something, because you can't have a country that has the highest rate of gun crime in the world and some of the most lax gun regulation in the world. There is a correlation and a causation there. Britain, since the 1980s and the 1990s, has imposed very harsh and very strict firearms rules. You cannot own a handgun. You can have a shotgun for hunting purposes and so on. But yet people aren't killed in the street anymore. It's one of these things like, okay, guns and civil liberties on this side, people not being killed in the street on this side. I mean, after the Port Arthur massacre, the the deadliest mass shooting in the history at the time, 37 people, I think, were killed by a man on a rampage in Hobart, Tasmania. Australia passed very stringent gun control rules. It's about the same size as, parts of America, Australia. It's got the same kind of culture as parts of America. I mean, go to Western Australia, go to Queensland. Yeah, people aren't going around killing people anymore. So gun control has to start somewhere.
Yeah, but the problem is y'all don't have police that fucking massacre people. Y'all don't have a ground military that walks around. I mean, I live in Houston. I live in Houston, is an extremely violent city. I don't feel safe here. So I know that somebody's armed. We've had guns pulled on us. I've owned tattoo shops where we have a cash business. You have to carry a gun in there. People rob tattoo shops at gunpoint all the time. I have a family. I know that there's a threat around me. I also know that the police here are not here to look out for our safety. They harm us. We're the poor.
Is more guns the answer to more guns? Is more guns is the cycle? So you've just said there are criminals that have firearms, so I, to feel safe, have a firearm.
Yeah, police aren't going to protect me.
Here's the question for you. School shooters, should you arm teachers?
I mean, if it's legal, I don't know. No. I mean, it depends.
That's the logical conclusion of your argument. A tattoo shop owner, have a firearm because someone could shoot me. A school shooter could turn up, therefore a teacher should have a firearm. I mean,
Depends on the training and the
infidel, jump in.
I don't think that. First, let me say that I think there's a whole lot of problems that feed this. I do think that the drug war that this country's fought, for the lack of a better way to put it, very poorly, has caused an escalation of the arming and militarization of the police. And that is a problem that we continue to see, and it continues to create a bigger divide between the police force and the local communities. Now, that's something that first, I think, before we even consider changing the gun laws in this country, because I do think that perhaps the Second Amendment should be revisited, and I do think there should be better regulation. But until we deal with our drug problem, and because that's where the excuse to militarize the police got started. And also that's where we see an escalation of gun violence in our country. So if we step back from that and decriminalize drugs, we can start talking about guns. We can start talking about the way we police our local communities, because that's a whole different issue, but it is related to guns. And so when we start dealing with these things, then we can get to the bottom of some of our other problems. And when we talk about gun shooting, no, I definitely don't think the solution is to arm teachers. You know, I remember a case here not that long ago where a young girl went to a police station, knocked on the door. The police officer answered. It was like a side, small little precinct, and she ended up disarming a cop, shooting and killing herself. So that just gives me a reminder of how guns in proximity to children, especially with people who are going to be potentially less trained than a police officer, that's very unsettling. Not so much because I think a teacher is going to make a bad decision in the heat of the moment, because there'll be less of those, then there'll be opportunities for a gun just to get into the hands of a student who, well, we know they make bad decisions. What is a kid's job is almost fuck up, because they're learning to deal and adapt with situations around them. So all these things really boil down to the way police relate to the community and what the police's priorities are. And one of those priorities that has to go away is the militarization of cops dealing with drugs and our drug prohibition in this country, because that's a driving force.
As well. I think this feeds into something else, and that's, I'm going to touch very briefly on it, and that's civil asset forfeiture, because police have the ability to just take money, and then you have to prove you got that money back. And 9 times out of 10, they spend it on toys for themselves.
Yep.
They spend it on toys for themselves to, in some cases, buy nice big shiny tanks like things to drive around in, buy nice big shiny weapons to fire at everybody. And it's the whole culture that this country has ended up in that I, as an outsider who has moved here, find very jarring. I mean, genuinely jarring. It's one of these things that I just cannot wrap my head around, that when I'm sat in the car with somebody, it's put your hands up if the police stop you so that they know you're not going to be shot, which is an absolute absurdity. Whereas in Britain, if a police officer walks up to you, it's like, evening, and that's about as far as it goes. And then you have a conversation with them. Not, oh, hang on a minute, do I need to, duck under the seat because someone's going to be firing into my vehicle? This is how bonkers we've actually become in this day and age, and I just don't quite get the culture. You, as a gun-toting Texan, tell me the culture that gives the gun-toting Texans their culture.
I'll tell you something. I'll tell you why I carry a gun. One of the main reasons. I got a gym that I fight out of, that my daughter fights out of. In our parking lot in the past year, we've had 4 murders, 4 separate occasions where people have been murdered. There is a drug front and a prostitution front that is within our parking lot that I can show you all the text messages that I've sent to police that I know. I can show the owner of this gym's text messages that we sent to police that we know. We have taken videos of it. We have watched it. We have videos of the people murdering people on our cameras in front of our gym. You know what the fucking police told us? That they don't want to get involved, that we need to make videos. We need to do an investigation on ourselves, and we need to report it. Those motherfuckers, I have the texts of somebody I've known for 20 fucking years. I can't talk to him anymore because of his response. My kid used to call him uncle. Now I can't even get around him because of that. So I carry guns because our police are so fucking inept and so fucking lazy and overfunded, and they don't do shit. So I have to protect myself from these motherfuckers who are selling children in front of our gym that everybody fucking knows about. And you watch it happen when I'm up there at 5 a.m. until fucking 9 p.m. There's drugs, there's prostitutes, there's sex trafficking, and there's literal murder. And it just happened like 2 months ago again. So I can't count on the people who I pay to fucking protect me or my child. And since it's already there, it's like recognizing there's a lion outside and pretending like it's not. I have to deal with the environment that's in front of me. How am I going to fight them? I can fight like a dog, but my fist versus a fucking 45 ain't nothing.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that you're talking about the forfeiture where the cops can pretty much take anything they want and seize it, and then you have to prove something to get it back. That is once again a byproduct of the drug war, of prohibition. And you talk about that, so it just is a vicious cycle of we continue to arm police then become less reputable themselves. We had 30 years ago, we had New Orleans police officers who thought it was a federal FBI sting, who thought they were defending drug warehouses that drugs were stored in. And on their off time, they were protecting those, thinking that's what they were doing, because this just feeds a level of dishonesty and us versus them between the police and the community. And as long as you have that, where the police are knocking in people's doors, covered up with their face covered up and looking like something out of a movie,
Scorsese film or something,
yes, then you're going to have people who don't trust the police for a very legitimate reason. If we take the prohibition away, not only on drugs, but the sex industry as well, if we take that and get realistic about that, we can address the issues that Jason's talking about that are happening in the parking lot, and then we could reduce that adversarial position that we have between cops and the constituents and the community, because we need community policing. We don't need a military style organization standing over us, because then it's more of an occupation than it is
incentivized.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. So if you think that I'm some Johnny foreigner that has come in and doesn't understand the culture, let me know in the comments below.